If you grew up in the 80s, you likely didn't realize your family was poor until you were an adult. As long as you were fed and had a roof over your head, you were happy. While some of the other kids had an allowance and brand-name clothes, your childhood was still full of moments that you still cherish to this day. Today we will cover some of the most obvious signs that you grew up poor in the 1980s. Taking a bite of a grilled cheese sandwich made from government cheese is something you can never forget. As part of Ronald Reagan's food assistance program, the 5-pound block of cheese was sent to low-income families starting in 1982, along with other products like powdered milk and peanut butter. If you received government food assistance, you likely remember the waxy and solid cheese block sitting in your fridge. It had a distinct taste that was slightly salty and rubbery. You weren't eating an artisanal cheese from France, but it kept you full, so you didn't complain. To this day, there are still 1.4 billion pounds of cheese stored in Missouri warehouses in case the program is reinstated. If you were an 80s kid with no money, you knew that your clothes weren't coming from the local mall. Your options were typically second-hand clothes or clothes from a store's clearance rack. Growing up, you likely wore hand-me-down clothes from your family members that they gave you once they outgrew them. If you shopped for new clothes, your mom would often take you to Kmart or Sears. Instead of buying clothing in your size, parents would often buy their child 2 sizes bigger so they could grow into them over the years. For sneakers, kids would get a pair of knockoff generic sneakers that would have a broken sole in a month. They got the job done, but they weren't the prettiest. With a tight budget, poor families had to get creative with how they did clothes shopping in the 80s. You never had the trendiest clothes, but you learned how to make your own style with what you had available. Like clothes shopping when you were poor, all that mattered when buying a car was the price. If you had a Chevy Chevette as a family car, you knew that you weren't doing that well financially. The Chevrolet Chevette was the butt of many jokes, but it was a basic form of transportation that was there when you needed it. It was cheap, small, and got you to where you needed to go. You weren't winning any races with the pitiful 1.6-liter engine, and driving on the highway was scarier than it should have been. However, it gave you exactly what you paid for, which was a bare-bones car that gave your family a ticket to reliable transportation. While your neighbors might have had access to hundreds of television channels, you were limited to a handful of local ones because cable television was considered a luxury. You likely remember the process of trying to find a channel by adjusting the antennas on the TV until you found a clear picture without excessive static. While your friends at school talked about the latest movies on HBO or MTV music videos, you only had network sitcoms and local news broadcasts. However, when you were poor in the 1980s, you made the most of it and played outdoors until the sun went down. You didn't know what you were missing and only cared about riding your bike around the neighborhood with your friends. If you enjoyed video games, the ultimate status symbol as a kid was having the latest video game console like the NES. However, as a poor kid, your reality looked much different. If you were lucky, you got a used console from past eras like an Atari 2600 or a Magnavox Odyssey. It might have come from a cousin or a garage sale, but it was yours, so that's all that mattered. After acquiring the console, you realized the games were the expensive part, and you saved up your money to buy a couple of games that you constantly replayed. Some of the most popular games were Miss Pac-Man, Frogger, and Pitfall. You were a generation behind, but having any video game console made you appreciate the sacrifice your parents made to keep you happy. Today, it's rare to hear about the public library being a place for entertainment. In the 80s, if you had no money, it didn't mean you had nothing to do. The public library was the place for kids to have free entertainment, from VHS tapes to cassette tapes. You were never asked to pay and could spend all day enjoying the endless media available. While your friends were paying $4 for a new comic book, you waited until your local library had it available. For many poor kids, the library was also the first place you had access to a computer. The computers weren't new, but it gave you the chance to learn the skills needed to adapt to the coming internet age. The library still plays an essential role in the lives of poor families today, but the impact is not as strong with media being so readily available. The school lunch program was also a lifeline for many poor children. While many kids handed over dollar bills in the lunchroom, you might have handed over the brightly colored slip that identified you as someone who used the free or reduced lunch program. While other kids got the lunches with additional food like ice cream cups or a second serving of chocolate milk, you were given the basic government commodity lunch. Square pizza, sloppy joes, and other lunchroom staples became part of your weekly routine. You didn't get extras, but lunch was enough to satisfy your cravings until dinner time arrived. The lunchroom was often where kids were first introduced to the fact that their parents weren't doing well financially. While it hurt your pride, you appreciate the free lunch program for being there during your time in need. Before the days of buy now, pay later, Layaway helped to save countless Christmases during the 80s. If you couldn't pay the full amount for something like a Cabbage Patch doll or a Nintendo Entertainment System, you would put it on Layaway. Every week leading up to the Christmas, parents would visit the store to make small payments until it was fully paid off. The item was often locked in a section of the store, and you could only look at it until it was paid off. As a kid, you could only pray that your parent would not miss a payment, so the item wouldn't go back on the shelf, and the suspense was often agonizing. If you were poor, it might have meant that your parents planned the gift 6 months prior to Christmas Day. Layaway was the silent engine that kept Christmas alive for the working poor in the 80s. Bad haircuts were a staple for poor kids in the 80s. When your parents were low on funds, taking you to a professional salon was the last thing on their mind. Your salon was the family kitchen, and the hairdresser was your mom or dad with a dull pair of scissors. The outcome was predictable with uneven edges and a haircut that made you hide your hair with a hat in embarrassment. If your parents were especially unskilled at cutting hair, you were given the infamous bowl cut. With a mixing bowl on your head, parents would just cut anything that showed beneath the rim. While it was embarrassing, it was necessary to save that extra $10 to $15 that went towards your groceries. Energy bills were brutal when you were poor, and families often made the tough decision to heat only one room in the house. All your family life, from doing homework to eating meals, was done primarily in one room that was designated the warm room. This room was often the living room, and the other rooms in the house were ignored until it was time to sleep under a mountain of blankets. On the bright side, the circumstances forced you to stay with your family and not isolate in your room. You huddled around the single space heater and got used to hanging out with your family, even when you didn't feel like it. When winter time rolled around, you always had a physical reminder of how much your family was budgeting. The simple comforts that we take for granted now weren't as important as saving those extra dollars at the time. Thanks for watching. Do any of these signs hit close to home for you? Let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It will help us grow and allow us to focus on making more videos you love.